Guys are ready for our very first panel discussion. I would like to request all of you to please give a very big round of applause. Of course, Ricardo and Mark have been already introduced to you. I'd like to invite Ricardo and Mark back onto the stage. And joining them on this panel discussion is also Mr. Sanjay Manchanda. I'd like to introduce you to him. Sanjay heads the Microsoft Information Worker Business Group here in India, comprising the Office 365 BPOS Cloud Service, SharePoint, Unified Communications and Office businesses in enterprise, SMB and consumer segments. Earlier, as Director, Product Management at Microsoft headquarters in Redmond, Washington, Sanjay led Product Management, WW Marketing and Technology Partnerships for the SharePoint business. He was also the Director, WW Marketing, transforming Microsoft's C-level engagement and delivering the overall marketing and sales engagement strategies and program. So ladies and gentlemen, please give them a big round of applause as I once again invite Ricardo, Mark and Sanjay onto the stage, leading us into our very first panel keynote discussion.
Hopefully you're going to enjoy our panel. When you go through presentation training and you go through professional development, they tell you certain things you shouldn't do. And I have two more things to add to the list. One is follow the past president of India with a panel presentation, because it's very difficult to top the past president of India at a session. And the other is a group of drummers that are completely wore you out, and now you're exhausted and ready for some drinks and dinner. But I'll have to pencil that into the things that I'm not supposed to do when I'm about to greet you. So I'm just waiting for the slides to come up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through just a quick overview of maybe 15 minutes at the most. One of the things that PMI did, and this is about value in turbulent times, and although largely the world has escaped some of the economic downturn that started in late 2008 through 2009 and 2010, it's still a very turbulent time for businesses and governments, especially governments. And one of the things that we did at PMI was launch an economic pulse survey early in 2009 to track what was going on in organizations, to monitor trends that we saw, things such as project cancellations, training and development budgets, what was happening to them, project restarts, changes in the way organizations were thinking about project and program management, as well as some of our additional research that we have. And what I'm going to do is try and set the stage a little bit about three particular trends that we see that we don't think are going away anytime soon. And then from there, I'm going to turn it to my two fellow panelists and hear from them what they've seen. And then we're going to engage, hopefully, in a dialogue to pull out some of those themes and what they've meant in the organizations that we deal with. Or I'm just going to continue to talk for the next 50 minutes or something like that until the slides come up. I know if I held the slides up to the camera, I'm certain you could see them. I have them right here. So one of the things I mentioned, we track quite a few trends at PMI. We do a lot of our own research, primary research, also track the research of other organizations. We identified at least three, but the three that we're going to speak about today, three trends or certainties in turbulent times, and as we come out of them, those things that we think are going to continue. So the first may sound familiar, but for me and for PMI, it's a little bit different, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, but it's doing more with less. Organizations and governments worldwide are struggling with tighter budgets, contraction and improvements in government services, all with less revenue to manage by. We're also seeing a trend on enterprise and portfolio management focused on innovation. And I'm going to talk in a separate slide about that as well, in managing change beyond the project. So we know project managers manage quite a bit of change in the project, but change is taking on a whole new meaning for organizations. So doing more with less. The Aberdeen Group, it's an analyst firm, IT analyst firm. PMI collaborated with them on some research around trends in program and portfolio management. And one of the things they identified was the tightness of resources. And that's probably something that's very familiar for you. as project and program managers that you don't always necessarily have the resources necessary to do the project. But what they're seeing now more than ever is real contention for specific resources, not just less resources, but organizations don't have the resources necessary to deliver the types of projects that their customers, stakeholders, citizens want. So it's not that you don't have enough of the right enough development resources, it's that you don't have enough of the right development resources, or you don't have the right marketing and communications or finance, and so on. So this study by Aberdeen Group pointed that portfolio management, resourcing being one of the key roles that program and portfolio management can play, as a critical need in organizations. Project managers play a role in portfolio management, but increasingly that's a role that's up in the project or program management office, and sometimes reporting directly to the CEO. Our own research, what we call the Pulse of the Profession research, has identified another trend, and it may be familiar to you, and I'd be curious if it is or not, and that is the average number of projects managed by a project manager has increased by 1/3 since we've been tracking it through our surveys. So in 2006, roughly 4.5, to 2010, nearly 6, almost a 33% increase. Now clearly that's not all projects or all project managers, and it's an average. So it's important not to focus too much on the absolute number, but more the rate of change. The rate of change of 33% in just 4 years is very significant for project managers and for organizations. And it's a trend that we don't likely see going away anytime soon. And what it's brought on is this austerity mindset. It's a word that's commonly used more in the public sector. We have an austerity mindset. Organizations call it cutting budgets or slashing overhead. But there's an austerity mindset that's starting to take place, and we're seeing a convergence both in the public and private sector around really doing more with less on a permanent basis. They're not restoring the budgets or the budget levels that they've had, and it's across the board. It's in hiring, so full-time headcount. It's in how they contract or outsource. It's especially in the areas of training and development. When we did our survey around the economic pulse, nearly 60% of the organizations had cut their training and development budgets. 3 years later, some of them have come back, but it's the one statistic or one metric that has not recovered to the level of, say, project restarts or new projects. So not only are organizations struggling to find the right kind of resources, they're also having to find new and innovative ways to develop the resources they have in an organization to be prepared for the future, which is uncertain. So it's an interesting trend. It's not the same thing as, let's do the same project with a lower budget. This is about enterprise resources, enterprise resource management, and really about having the right skills. Another interesting area is innovation. Many of the surveys that we've done, that PwC, IBM, and others have done in CEO level, is that innovation is a top priority for organizations. And it's not a surprise. The one thing that's common in every economic downturn is that organizations squeeze out cash flow from operations. It's the first thing they do. It's a natural reaction. They want to cut as much as they can out of the operating budget, take that cash, build up the balance sheet, and protect the organization for however long that economic downturn lasts. In this case, it was very, very substantial. So organizations do that, and that's their first reaction. But one of the things that we found, in not all organizations, but surprisingly in many organizations, is this economic downturn, they didn't cut back on innovation. And one of the things they didn't do was cut back on project and program management. Because the lessons of past crises, especially economic crises, is that more market share is gained during the recession than after the recession. So the competitive leader, the leader in their sector or their industry, is investing in the recession to come out of the recession in a leadership position. Also, new companies emerge in the sectors. So in the IT area, companies like Google get created during a recession, but nobody sees it coming. One of the critical factors for organizations that now value innovation and that are investing more in it is that they know that roughly only half of them feel that they're better than their competitors or their peer groups. But most of them that don't have to refine processes, the second bullet, recognize that they don't have any way to connect these projects and programs to align it to an overall strategy, what you and I would call portfolio management. And that's a critical role that project and program management is starting to play today more than ever, which is a role in helping organizations manage the innovation process. For some, in the past, it was counterintuitive for them to think that project management could help drive something as loose or as free as innovation. But most organizations, or many organizations now, realize they're not counter to each other. They complement each other. To make sense of all the opportunities, all the possibilities in innovation, you need some kind of systematic, standardized process. And project management, in particular portfolio management, is helping organizations do that. And that's a trend, as I mentioned, during the recession we saw it. Large financial organizations, financial services organizations, banks, at the peak of the recession, they were in the worst trouble. But we know firsthand in talking to them, many of them are partners of PMI, they were investing in project and program management to help them manage what's the right product to build to market, or bring to market rather, when this recession begins to recede and we come out of it. Now, the last 4 to 5 weeks have challenged whether we're truly out of it globally, but we know we will come out of it. And those organizations are going to be market leaders that have invested in innovation and have the capabilities, such as portfolio management, to help them manage the opportunities. And the last one, I mentioned change, and of course project managers manage change within a project. This graphic is one that we use to talk about a traditional organization, the modern organization, founded in the 20th century, highly optimized for routine operations. So you think of way back to the automotive industry with Ford and all the optimization that they were able to achieve, and then there from large IT platforms, from the mainframes to more efficient systems. Those functional organizations got really good at doing the same thing over and over again. But it was when they were challenged with speed and competition that they found it was difficult to pool those resources across or from across the organization into something called a project team. So we use this graphic to show the challenge that organizations had, and many of them still have. But organizations we know today have embraced project management. But those that are invested in it are getting better at it and are even mature, see additional challenges. No longer is it sufficient for project managers to possess the technical skills of project management. I heard a question in the discussion earlier. It's about time, scope, and budget, right? Those things are absolutely critical. But what organizations have said is they're table stakes now. That's the minimum requirement for qualified project and program managers. What we also want is strategic management and business management skills. We want them to be able to understand the customer, our go-to-market strategy, how we differentiate ourselves either globally or locally. So they're looking for strategic management and business management skills that go way beyond the project, but they want them in their project and program managers because the project outputs aren't necessarily indicative of the benefit or the value that the organization really wants to achieve in the long term. And that third group, which you've heard a lot about for the last 5 to 10 years, soft skills, leadership skills, where they were nice to have if you could get a project manager that could do the technical side, and it was nice if you could get somebody that had some of the softer or leadership skills, negotiation, conflict resolution, communication, the things that many of you pursue in your professional development. They're no longer nice to have, they're increasingly must-haves in organizations. So you have this, we talked about the triple constraint. We have a different kind of triple constraint, and it's about your capabilities as project and program managers. It's about your competencies and skills, that profile that you need. It's now strategic and business management, leadership or soft skills, and technical skills that should be unmatched against any other. It's not a surprise. You know, we have a registered education provider program. They teach as many as 700,000 to 800,000 people every year. The top courses that they report that project and program managers are pursuing are in the leadership side. conflict resolution, negotiation, change management, all areas that have nothing to do necessarily with time, scope, or budget. So that's the context from a PMI perspective. There's many other trends, but I did want to leave you with, or start us with rather, at least three things that we see affecting organizations and government, and an interesting convergence too. For one of the first times, I think, globally, governments are really focused in the same way, maybe not the same way, but in the same areas as the private sector. And that is, you hear a lot about austerity, you hear a lot about budget cuts and controls, you're hearing more about accountability and transparency, things that private sector organizations have had to deal with for years, you know, shareholders, analysts, and so on. So it's an interesting world. 2011 is already proving to be maybe not as interesting as 2009 and 2010, but clearly no certainty at the moment as we move almost into 2012. So they're my opening comments. I'm going to turn it to the panel. Sanjay, if I could ask you to go next and talk a little bit about what you're seeing.
One, what exactly is different about turbulent times? You could say, you know, we deal with ups and downs all the time. What's so spectacular about or different about turbulent times? So let me spend a minute on that. Second, what does it do from a from a portfolio and project management standpoint? What does it mean? Does it put new pressures on it? Does it put new requirements on it? And then finally, what does it mean for us as practitioners of portfolio and project management? You know, what kind of new opportunities or burdens does it put on you? And I think that'll be a good setting for some of the panel discussion we can have afterwards. As I was thinking through what's happening in the economy today, one of the things that occurred to me, having seen about three of these, is that historically we were accustomed to seeing economic ups and downs, but the cycles were relatively long. It happened, and then you knew that for the next 10 years you'd be fine. The housing prices went down, they slowly came back, and everybody was happy that for the next couple of decades they would be fine. And what's happened over the last 5 years is that's kind of changed. I don't think anybody can explain why, but it's definitely changed. We had one in the early 2000s. We thought we were done for the decade. Well, surprise. We had another one in 2007, just when everybody was beginning to feel good about the economy. We came out of that 2 years later, and everybody started saying, hey, the spending is back, and investment banking is going to come back, and people are going to do mergers and acquisitions, which they did. And we're back facing a recession all over again in less than 2.5 years. So what that tells us is that these turbulent times now are becoming a lot more compressed. And so it has some impact, and I'll talk about what that means. The second thing, and you know, you could see this with the stock prices, how the indexes are doing, but there are other indicators. And the second thing is how volatile things have gotten in terms of the amplitude. So the highs and the lows are actually much, much more pronounced than they used to be. And to some extent, I think we've become accustomed to seeing the highs and the lows to that degree, whereas a few years ago, or maybe 2 decades ago, we would have reacted a lot more negatively to the kinds of swings that we're seeing today. And it's like I said, it's not just about the Sensex or the Dow Jones. I mean, just look closer home. About 5 months ago, I was reading repeatedly Mahindra & Mahindra, Tata Motors, Suzuki. The automotive industry in India was going gangbusters. Growth rates were upwards of 30 to 35%. Sales were going up in that range. Motorcycles, cars, it didn't matter. It didn't matter whether it was the entry-level car or it was BMW and the high-end car. And if you read the papers, like literally 2 weeks ago, the same automotive companies in the space of 4 to 5 months are struggling because demand has completely dropped. So it's not just about the stock market, it's like this unpredictability, and that's what turbulence is really all about. So let's think about what this means to the business or to an organization. All of a sudden, your level of unpredictability and what you need to do to manage is not about, can I get my project to be more efficient? Can I move a few resources from here to there? All of a sudden, the decisions that you are being forced to make or a business has to make are far, far more deep and more far-reaching. They can be as far as figuring out whether an entire business unit or an entire new portfolio investment even makes sense anymore. And we've seen examples of that in many companies. I won't take names, but in recent times, there have been companies who 2 years ago or 3 years ago embarked on a strategy thinking it was the right thing to do to go into, let's say, a consumer market, and went and spent billions of dollars, or at least hundreds of millions of dollars, acquiring companies, investing in developing those products even further, investing in developing their marketing expertise and sales channels to be able to take advantage of that. And literally 2.5 to 3 years later, they're going, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. Now, these are the kinds of decisions that all businesses have to take. And the frequency or the speed with which you have to react, just because of that, the amplitude of the volatility, the speed with which you have to react goes up. So what does that mean from a product management, portfolio management standpoint? Like I said earlier, no longer are you dealing with how can I get my project to be finished on time? How can I be more efficient in using my resources? You're actually making decisions at a way more strategic level. Am I even in this area of business any longer? Should I be completely doubling down on a new part of the business at the cost of something else that I will completely stop investing in for the foreseeable future? Now, that means that I'll be biased, being a technology and a tools provider. My bias will be to talk about what that means from a technology and infrastructure standpoint. What that means is that you have to have access to a couple of things. One, the company has to be really disciplined about setting very clearly what are the business goals and what does success look like. Not the business drivers, not looking at individual projects and saying, is this project going to be the right ROI? Is this project going to be profitable? Because that may not matter at all. If you're a company that's fighting for survival, top line growth may not be the big issue you're worrying about. A particular individual project's profitability or ROI may be the furthest from your mind. And so you have to have, and that's the basis of what good portfolio management is, really strong definition and understanding at the leadership level, and really throughout the company, but certainly at the leadership level, of what is success. What am I going to really focus on to be successful and meet my business goals in this turbulent environment? Because that's going to give you clarity to get to the next step, which is to define the strategies that are going to make you successful. And on down the chain, you're very clear about the projects you're going to invest in or not. But that organizational framework, the excellence of having that framework and properly aligned between the goals, the strategy, and the projects/processes becomes even more critical. The second thing is, because you're having to deal with making decisions at a much, much faster pace, having access to information, visibility to business intelligence becomes absolutely critical. All of a sudden, if you're the kind of company or the kind of organization that is doing project management using Excel, and I love Excel, believe me, not going to work for you. Most projects today, and certainly when you think of portfolio management, are way too complex to be in the minds of a single individual. They are distributed, multiple organizations, multiple locations, multiple departments, and so having a system that actually allows you to encode that organizational set of the goals, the strategy, and the projects, and do effective portfolio management become really critical. Because that's the only way you're going to have access to information across the organization to make the decisions. And then finally, I think the third thing, which is probably a little not necessarily intuitive, but something I spoke about in the last PMI conference. For those of you who were here, I spoke about the fourth dimension of project and portfolio management. And quite frankly, I was also amused by the fact that we were talking about a fourth dimension, but in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense. And for those who weren't there, or even for those who were, the fourth dimension was taking the three dimensions which are very commonly thought of in project management, which is process, time, and resource, and adding the concept of collaboration. Because in the end, all project work involves a whole lot of collaboration today. And so I emphasized how important it was to be able to have the right level of collaboration and also have the right infrastructure and tools to facilitate collaboration. I actually think turbulent times takes us to the next level. It actually now requires you not only to collaborate, but start looking at how you can use new social technologies to be able to find people who are experts, who have the judgment. Because what's going to happen in times like these is the data that you have, the information that you have is historical. And I think Dr. Kalam said, what worked yesterday, what was good yesterday, what made sense yesterday, may not make sense today. And so access to the historical trend information and data is good, but probably not sufficient. The kinds of decisions you have to make may actually only come from gut instinct and judgment that experienced business people have. How are you going to find these people in the time that you need them, no matter where they are within the organization? So expertise finding people who have this judgment, who have this institutional insight becomes very critical. And so technologies, or the ability, and it doesn't have to be technology, but the ability to facilitate collaboration using things like social networking, I think become way more important. And that's some of the trend that we're seeing in some of our customers in different industries. And one of the things that surprised me personally is how quickly social networking within the enterprise has become a very integral part of how people do business, and how closely associated it is becoming with traditional project management, including enterprise project management solutions. So let me stop there and we'll continue during the panel discussion. Thank you.
I really need to try two things, okay? The only two words that I learned here. First, I need to say namaste and salam alaikum. And now I have two words more in my languages. I would like to share a different perspective from the same problems that we are facing all over the world. I come from a different region. I come from Latin America. And my perspective, actually, although different, is quite the same. I'm going to talk about three things that I think that are important to mention. Portfolio management, risk management, and complexity. About portfolio management, one thing that is really important for me is that more often now, when I go to the companies, they are talking about project management as something regular, but they are talking more about portfolio management. And they talk about how to select the right projects. And that's a way different point of view from what was happening 5 years ago. And something important to mention or to keep in mind is that when we talk about crisis, in Latin America, we are always in crisis. When Sanjay was mentioning these cycles, that we say, okay, it's going to be every 10 years, in Latin America, it's every 4 years, because it's every election time. So every time that there was an election, there was a crisis for sure. So I think that we were prepared for that. What we were not prepared was to maintain the crisis. It was every 4 years, it was a crisis, we suffered, we had to deal with new problems, and then another 3 years of stability, and another year of crisis. Now, the perspective has changed to talk about how to maintain this, how to think in the long term. And that's something really amazing for me, because now we are talking about portfolio management, we are talking about how to select the right projects, how to make these projects work, and companies from all the sizes, for example, Petrobras, that it's the oil company from Brazil. This is a company that they have income like for 127 billion a year, but they had a portfolio of 224 billion, okay? And when we were talking with this lady in Brazil, like in March, she's the responsible of the PMO. She's the one that is controlling all the portfolio of projects. And it was really interesting for me that she says it's not only about the strategic projects, it's also about those projects that may become what we call now black swans. Do you know that term? Things that are really rare, but they may happen, okay? You never expected to have a black swan, but it will be. So she was keeping an eye on those strategic projects, but she was keeping an eye also in those minor projects. So she was saying, I go to the projects and I check if they are doing it right. Because if they are not doing it right, they become a problem and later it's going to be impacting my business. But it's managing the whole portfolio. It's not only strategic, it's also those projects that could become a problem. And that brings me to the second topic, that it's risk management. In risk management, something that we are doing now compared to before is that now we are trying to identify black swans or problems way before. And when Sanjay was mentioning that indicators, visibility to the management was important, it's really important. Because if you don't have visibility, then it's very impossible, it's quite impossible to understand what are your risks. So you really need to have indicators to see if you are going in the right direction or not. And that's a change in the mindset, because it's not about taking a risk register and writing risk and putting probability and occurrence and impact and etc. That was simple. Now we are talking about what's the forecasting of this risk. How can we simulate this situation? Is this going to be impacting us? For how much? And then based on that, we can make decisions on the portfolio. And that's a change in the mindset. And finally, it's about complexity. And when I was coming here, I was reading an article in the Harvard Business Review. And they were talking about complexity. And they were talking about organizations. They say that when times are tough, we were used to have simple organizations or complicated organizations. And now we are moving more to have complex organizations. And let me compare these two projects. A simple project was that when we say we have 4 people, 2 months, they are going to be working in this room, they are going to be using Java, they are going to be producing 5 modules, 10,000 lines of code, or they are going to be creating a building with this structure, 5 floors, whatever. That was predictable because it was easy. It was just put the right steps in the right order and you can forecast what's going to be the outcome. Simple. Complicated was that you have several components that were interacting, but they were in a patterned way. So you can have a pattern and still you can predict it. But now our reality, being here, for example, and doing outsourcing globally means that we are going to have people in India, people working in US, people working in Brazil, and they have different languages, and we come from different backgrounds. We have people from engineering, accounting, management, marketing, and then we have this environment of the virtual thing, and we have to do projects with social responsibility. This is not predictable anymore. The models that we were used to have that were predictable, they are not working as they were supposed to be. So now we need to adjust to have these complex projects and to live with the complex projects and to be prepared for the unexpected. So now we are working towards how can I, instead of spending my time on the perfect estimation for the perfect proposal, is how can I estimate to a point where I feel comfortable to continue. And that's the reason we talk about Agile, because now we are talking about how can I continue, how can I create something that is the basis for continuing. And now we divide the work in something that is more manageable. Now we try to redistribute the work among several people to ensure that it's manageable and that lack of certainty that we had before is not going to be impacting us. Okay, let me remember that again this. Portfolio management, an excellent or a very deep risk management, and being aware that complexity means that you will not be able to estimate and forecast and have a perfect process. You have to be prepared for the change. And with that, companies right now are driving for these things that Mark was mentioning, like innovation, social responsibility. And those are complex projects. Now we need to deal with that. And now, instead of just trying to find the holy grail in project management that is going to give us the perfect project, deal with the fact that the projects are going to be failing. We need to fix them. It's easier. On the other hand, something that I would like to comment is about the fourth component that Sanjay was mentioning, collaboration. When we talk about collaboration, for me it's this complexity factor, because it's having people that could be a lot of people interacting and having a lot of interdependencies and interacting in ways that I didn't know that they could be interacting. So when you have these components that add the complexity and they need to collaborate, that fourth component really makes a difference in the triple constraint. It's not just a matter of saying, put people together and they will collaborate. You give them SharePoint and they will collaborate. It's not about that. It goes beyond. You need to have real, strong, soft skills, communication, negotiation, how to deal with conflict. Because those are the things that are going to be creating a very big problem for you. Okay, thank you.
We should probably just adjourn and make a night of it, I think. But if I listen to what I said and I hear some of the things that you've commented both on, I'm beginning to sense a word that I'm going to call agility. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about agile methods for project management or software development, although that can be a big piece of an agile organization. But I'm sensing that in both project leaders, I'll call us all project leaders, and organizations are revolving around this need to be more agile as an organization. We worked with a PMI, that is, we work with many organizations and government around the world, and they continually talk about this concept of flexibility and agility in not just uncertain economic times, but uncertain customer times. The customers aren't sure what they want, and the changing demands, shifts in budget, or especially in the public sector, budgetary appropriations and shifts that maybe take longer and or disappear altogether. So maybe we can talk a little bit about agility in organizations, how you see organizations taking on agility as a topic or as a critical need relative to what we've talked about, innovation, technology, social technology, social technology, helping that collaboration and so on. Do we see any kind of trend, any activity in organizations that we can maybe highlight for the group?
So you'll notice that my bias is going to be more from the technology angle, or how people are looking at leveraging technology to get some of these benefits, because that's the perspective that I get when I talk to a lot of our customers. I think there are a couple of things that have happened, and if customers haven't already done it, these kinds of turbulent times kind of expose it for them, and they start thinking about it seriously. One of them is being much more disciplined about thinking at a macro level about portfolio management rather than just project management. And there are definitely a couple of examples that I've seen, both in the technology services industry, but also in manufacturing, where now there are instances where companies are beginning to implement a simple portfolio management capability. So I don't mean just the technology or the tools, but even thinking very carefully about the methodology of how they define goals, how they align that with strategies, and also implementing a discipline on making sure that there's a rigor to ensure that alignment as they execute. That's definitely one thing that we're seeing, because what it does for them then is allows them to be agile when they do need to make a decision on which things to stop investing in or investing in less, because they have this clear alignment which they can see and actually permeate throughout the organization. So that's one thing that's definitely happening much more.
Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, you're on.
Okay. In my case, something that it's interesting about agility is the fact that it's also in other kind of industries, and especially in the portfolio management side. Because before we were talking about when do you start the budget cycle. So it was like in March to just get to an agreement kind of November, okay? And it was going to be finally in February. So it took a lot of time just to discuss the budget. Now it's even faster. They decide on projects faster because now it's just normal to have criteria to select the projects, to understand what's going to be the right investment, and if we are not sure about something, how can we test before implementing? So agility for me means how can we decide better, faster in when to invest in projects. On the other hand, is how to execute projects. And in my case, most of the projects are for IT, but I also teach project management. I have students from the oil industry, from healthcare, from hospitality, and one of the trends that I always see is that they are trying to do projects that are shorter, clear in benefits, and that they could be easily related to strategy. They don't want to take projects that are 4 years long, multi-year, multi-country, and etc., because it's most likely that they are going to fail. So usually what it's changing, at least in these industries, is they are trying to take small pieces of projects that could be easily measured.
One of the, in talking to executives, sometimes the CEO, but many times those who report to the CEO in the portfolio management area, they don't actually recognize, some don't recognize that they actually do portfolio management. So what we all may find is common terminology, some of the processes and criteria that you mentioned. Some organizations don't actually know they do portfolio management, so when we talk about it, they finally recognize we do that. Now sometimes it's very informal, so it's the person has the loudest voice, so that's one criteria. It's the person that more closely reports to the person that actually has the budget authority. So it's not necessarily the optimal way, but these organizations do portfolio management at some level. But when they talk about formal portfolio management and that selection process, then you start to see a cultural shift, right? So even at the project level, you see a cultural shift. There's a functional manager that's responsible for the business in quotes, and then there's this project that sooner or later he or she's going to inherit into operations. When you get to the portfolio management, there seems to be as much of a cultural dynamic there, even though there's fewer people involved often, but it's about competitiveness, I think, for budgetary dollars and focus and priority. Do you see any opportunity for PPM leaders in this room and outside of this room to help their organization understand portfolio management and project management, or vice versa, project management in the context of portfolio management, to help them see how making the right decision is critical to ultimately the success? And I point to a conference that Ricardo and I attended earlier this year in Florianopolis in Brazil, and there was a big emphasis on portfolio management in that conference because they felt not that they had achieved the full value of project management, but they weren't getting the full value of project management without a really robust portfolio approach.
So I would agree. I think I may have mentioned this when I was speaking up at the podium. But I think one of the opportunities that this presents to PPM practitioners, professionals like yourselves, like all of us, is that all of a sudden the impact that you can have on the organization is much more strategic than looking purely at the process level. And I think people are beginning to realize that that they have the ability and the opportunity to make that impact. That's one. Second, I think most companies are realizing that you cannot wing portfolio management. There is a necessity to have, and you're right, at the macro, at the highest level, most companies will do some type of portfolio management, but just a few people know it. The challenge in these kinds of fast-moving or fast-changing times is that if just a few people at the top know what the strategy is and how, the goals are and how they align with strategies, but the rest of the organization doesn't have visibility into it, then it is guaranteed to not be an agile organization, and most likely it's guaranteed to make the wrong decisions. And so I think companies are beginning to realize, at least a few are, that having the ability to share that information and expose it, make it visible up and down the organization is very critical to have a successful portfolio management strategy and actually have that executed in any meaningful way.
For me, when we were talking before, I was saying that one of the challenges is that if you go to a company like Procter & Gamble, large company, they understand portfolio management, okay? They should have someone that has that role, portfolio manager of something, okay? So that's easy. The problem comes when you go to the small and medium companies, because they don't call that portfolio management. They do that. And when you talk about portfolio management, they usually say, no, that's too complex for me. So one of the opportunities that we have is to help them to understand that whatever selection they are doing, whatever criteria they are applying, whatever the method that they have for selecting investments or so, they are doing somehow portfolio management. Because that will be the first step for them to understand that the projects are really related to the strategy. And one piece of advice that I always say is, if you really want to elevate your conversation to be more strategic, do you know the strategic objectives of your company? Can you match those to your project? Because the project is not about creating a software for clients management. That's easy. But what's going to be contributing this in the strategy of the company? Have you tried to find out that? Because if you have a relationship, if you have a match between your project and the strategy or the objectives, then it's easy to elevate my conversation, to say, we are talking about the same. I'm just operating, but I'm helping you with the strategy. And that's something that we really need to change. Because otherwise, projects are going to be just normal things that we do. And we have more value than that, no?
Yeah, it's an interesting thread because it reminds me of the alignment issue of a study that Gartner did with executive level in their organization, and they surveyed what the critical success factors in that organization were relative to project management. And surprisingly, what we call the triple constraint, if you added the total percentage for those three, it didn't even achieve 50%. So those three, time, scope, and budget, were not even considered half of the success factor. One of the highest rated success factors was strategic alignment or alignment. And so it's that connection between project, program, and portfolio management. Executives may not know what it's called, but they're yearning and demanding alignment to the projects, to the ultimate long-term strategy. So I think it's interesting what you pulled out. I see we're kind of getting a time signal, so I think we have one more thing I heard which I wanted to just explore a little bit, because I'd be interested as the conference goes on over the next couple of days, as people talk about it. There's this concept of complexity, right? And in a project world, there's now organizations that have created something called complex project management. And so not saying whether there is or isn't, but I can talk about a global aerospace and defense organization that was quoted as saying, we don't have complex projects, we have complicated projects. But yet other organizations are willing to declare something called complex projects, and therefore maybe, perhaps, or not, complex project management. So I'm going to put a little bit of a leader out there because I have a personal interest in it, leading PMI as an organization, but I also have a perspective from my private sector days, and that is, it might be that project management is different, or it might be that it's not. But what changes are all the circumstances around that project. So whether it's economic uncertainty, budgetary, cuts or changes, resources available or not, unknown tools in the development, unknown targets that you're trying to develop too, deliverables. All those things create uncertainty. I'm not sure it creates something called complex project management. But for me, what it does highlight is that now more than ever, a project manager has to manage all those things. And the project manager is no longer about, and I said this earlier, just the triple constraint. That's what I would call the project part of project management. A project manager now becomes a business manager for the organization. So just as a functional manager is managing some part of the operations or finance or marketing, the project manager is managing their part of the business, but it happens to be in one or more projects that they're responsible for. So I just want to talk a little bit before we end the session around complexity, complicated, really difficult, I'm really confused. Where do you see that all fitting in?
I guess three things come to mind, and you're absolutely right. The complexity is the thing that I think a really small company. It's very easy. You have a few people. There's not a lot of opportunity for miscommunication. You can walk across to the person. You can make sure they understand exactly what you're doing. As the company gets larger, you have more projects, more people involved. You have more locations. All of this stuff happens. And then, of course, you go up the pyramid and it becomes really complex. So there's actually three elements, and two of them will be a little self-serving, and you'll have to forgive me for that. But one, I think the only way to manage the complexity is, in fact, having a good methodology in place, which I think, project managers, portfolio managers, people who are educated in the discipline can help the organization understand how to implement correctly, and that's really critical. Second, to be able to actually make that executable, you need the right set of technology and tools that can help you manage the complexity, because I don't think we can remove the complexity. We'll have to learn how to manage it effectively. And in that realm, related to that, one of the things that I've learned in looking at a variety of technology implementations related to enterprise project management, portfolio management, or other technologies, is that often the ROI and success of these implementations is less about feature functionality and the robustness of the technology, and as much to do with, in fact, sometimes even more, with how easy it is for the users to be able to adapt to them and to use them. And so the easier the technology is for people to learn without a whole lot of training, and it's intuitive, is very, very critical. And we've seen that repeatedly, at least amongst the customers who have implemented portfolio management, project management tools, but also other technologies. The last thing I would say is that in this kind of environment, all of these things, the process, the methodology, the tools are hugely important, and the project manager plays a big role. But one of the biggest things that you have the opportunity to do, and I think becomes critical, is help organizations through the change management, which I think you alluded to in your talk, which is the change management aspect of it becomes really, really critical. Organizations do not like to hear that we have to change. People have pet projects they do not want to let go of. And so the emphasis and the burden on the project manager to get that skill and effectively lead the company, the department, the division through change becomes very, very critical. And it's not about technology. It's not about process.
When I was reading the article in the Harvard Business Review, they were explaining the simple, complicated, and complex. And that was easy for me because it says, simple, you put box A, box B, and box C, and you expect the result. Easy. Complicated, you put the box A, box B, it has some gray parts, but kind of you can work with it and you can have an outcome. But complex is you have box A, you don't know if you have a box B, and maybe you have a box C, and maybe there's going to be someone that brings a box D. That's complex. It's you expect the unexpected. And what I see right now is that we were used to say that small projects were not complex. But honestly, how many of you have had projects that were really small and were more complicated or complex than anything? Not even complicated, because complicated you can predict the outcome. I was in a SAP implementation in Paraguay. So it was only 30 users, and it was supposed to be fine. It was 6 months, everything was perfect, and etc. It proved to me that I didn't realize how complex was going to be because of the environment that was acting in there, because of the lack of change management, because of the technology that was new for them, because of the relationship with the consultants, because of the lack of communication. All those things that were environmental to the project, they made the project really complex. So it took me longer to try to fix it. It took me a lot of effort and energy. But the thing is, you have to be prepared for that. And one thing that I was explaining the other day in this project is I learned that when the reality comes through the door, the plan goes through the window. And what I have to be prepared for is to have my toolbox and say, I know how to manage scope, I know how to manage time, I know how to manage risk, I know how to implement change management, I know how to do EVM, I know how to status reports and etc. But for this particular project, I have to use only this, and this. I cannot be using the same formula with the same methodology, with the same tools for everything, because that's what was killing us. That we were trying to use one size fits all. It's just a matter of being selective. And for being selective, you have to have those skills. And it's not only a matter of playing with the skills and knowledge, it's also having these soft skills. Because I can have the perfect EVM formula, I can have the perfect risk management tool, the best status report ever. But if I don't know how to negotiate this with the user, done. If I don't know how to communicate this to an audience that it's not technical, that it's the upper management, that they don't understand projects, they don't care about projects, they see that we are only secretaries. So I think that the most important thing is first to understand that complicated or complex are going to occur anywhere. It could be a small project, it could be a very large project. Second is to ensure that you have the right toolbox and that you are able to use your toolbox and adjust your toolbox depending on what is going to happen. Expect the unexpected. Don't become part of the status quo.
I think that's it. I'll say one more thing on the issue of complexity. And I was at a meeting with Craig Killa, who's our vice president for the organization market. And we were the large company, household name. I won't share their name because they were telling us things in confidence. But they deal with complicated, big, uncertain, complex projects. One of the largest in the European Union right now, they're involved in, and it's not going well. We'll say it's challenged at best. And they said, every time we get to the end of the project, and we do not just the lessons learned, but they do a post-mortem on, what went wrong or what went right, they realize that every time they've had a project failure, they didn't do the things that they knew they should have done all along. It's the things that they know about that they didn't do well, not the things they didn't know about. So it's an interesting juxtaposition against a lot of the dialogue out there about there's something we don't new, there's something innovative in project management. Their opinion or perspective was, we just didn't do what we already knew we had to do. We didn't do it well. And we just need to get to understand the reasons why more than trying to create something else. So it's an interesting, I think, juxtaposition. So I see the time is up for the session. I want to thank my panelists, Sanjay and Ricardo, for joining me. It's been a pleasure to spend this time with you, and we'll see you throughout the conference as well. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yep, thank you. Ricardo, pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a very big round of applause once again. I'd like to invite Raj on stage and request him to present Ricardo, Mark, and Sanjay with a small token of our appreciation. Ricardo, thank you very much for being here with us. I'd like to request you to please accept this as a... Thank you, Sanjay, once again very much indeed for being a part of this panel discussion. keynote discussion this evening. Thank you very much indeed. And last, but definitely not least, I'd also like to apologize to our speakers for the technical glitch. Thank you once again, gentlemen.